They say first impressions matter. But in a world driven by image, status, and labels, those impressions are often shaped by what we see on the surface rather than what truly lies beneath. This is especially true in high-paced urban environments where people are constantly on the move, where designer suits and expensive watches seem to define a person's worth, and where individuals who don't look the part are often dismissed without a second thought. The first key point in this story is a reflection of that very reality. Judgment based on appearance leads to unexpected lessons. When the CEO crossed paths with the Black Street vendor, the dynamic was already imbalanced. One stood adorned in tailored clothing, gleaming shoes, and a Rolex worth more than what many earn in months. The other stood behind a modest cart or table, his tools well used, his hands marked by labor, his clothes plain and practical. It was a scene of contrast, of power and perceived insignificance. But beneath that image lay a deeper truth, a test neither of them saw coming. The CEO's laughter wasn't just casual amusement, it carried condescension. He didn't expect the vendor to succeed. In fact, he expected him to fail. Offering his Rolex was a mockery disguised as a challenge. It was the kind of moment people with power create to assert dominance, to remind others of their supposed place in the social hierarchy. He saw the vendor's skin color, his station in life, his lack of formal attire, and assumed incompetence. That assumption wasn't just rooted in arrogance. It was fueled by the age-old societal habit of underestimating people based on how they look or where they come from. This kind of judgment happens every day. In boardrooms, on sidewalks, in schools, in airports, everywhere we go. People are sorted and ranked in our minds before they speak a word. Appearances become the shortcut to evaluation, and assumptions take the place of real understanding. But reality has a way of humbling perception, and sometimes it only takes a moment to turn the tables. As the vendor calmly examined the Rolex, something began to shift. Those watching may have still held doubts, but his focus, the steady movement of his hands, the quiet confidence in his demeanor, all began to disrupt the narrative. Suddenly, it wasn't about flashy watches or fitted suits. It was about skill. It was about patience. It was about mastery, something the CEO didn't expect from someone he saw as beneath him. This is where the true lesson begins. Because when judgment is based on appearance, we don't just risk being wrong. We risk missing out on brilliance. The CEO nearly walked away with nothing more than a smug story to tell at his next cocktail party. Instead, he witnessed a moment of excellence that money couldn't buy. The man he mocked proved not only capable, but extraordinary. His craftsmanship outshone the watch itself. The irony was undeniable. The Rolex, a symbol of wealth and status, was now associated with someone who had neither, at least in material terms, but possessed far more value than what met the eye. And while the vendor's actions spoke volumes, the CEO's silence afterward said even more. That stunned reaction, the freezing in place, was a mirror shattering. His assumptions, his pride, his belief in the superiority of his image, all of it cracked in a single moment. It was a silent realization that the world he thought he understood was more complex than it appeared, that people he might have dismissed have stories, talents, and power he never imagined. This one story reminds us that when we rely on appearance to define people, we are often blinded to their true capabilities. Judging someone by their skin color, job title, or wardrobe isn't just unfair. It's a mistake that limits everyone involved. It limits growth, it limits connection, and it limits the possibilities of witnessing real, human excellence in places we least expect it. When that judgment is proven wrong, the impact isn't just personal, it ripples outward. Others who watched that moment unfold walked away changed too. They saw the vendor differently. Maybe they even saw themselves differently. Because seeing someone underestimated and then watching them rise, that challenges the lens through which we view the world. True skill and value often go unnoticed. In a world that praises visibility, followers, and flashy resumes, the quiet mastery of everyday people is easily overlooked. Talent has become something we associate with titles, certificates, and social media recognition, not necessarily with dedication, repetition, and a relentless pursuit of excellence out of the spotlight. The story of the Black Street vendor fixing a luxury Rolex is a perfect illustration of how real value often hides behind what society chooses to ignore. The vendor didn't have a glowing brand behind his name. He didn't work out of a climate-controlled glass office with receptionists and marketing teams. He didn't have a LinkedIn profile listing degrees from elite universities. He simply had his tools, his hands, his experience, and an inner confidence that couldn't be bought or faked. Every day, people like him work without applause. They build skills through repetition, through solving real-world problems, not hypothetical ones, and they learn not for recognition, but for survival, for pride, for purpose. The Rolex, a symbol of status, landed in his hands not out of trust, but as a joke. The CEO didn't believe the vendor would fix it. He didn't even consider it a real possibility. That disbelief wasn't just about race or class. It was about the narrow definition many people have about what talent looks like. We've been taught to expect skill only from those with framed diplomas or people in suits with perfect speech and polished appearances. And when someone comes along who doesn't fit that image, their brilliance is dismissed before it has the chance to be revealed. What makes this moment powerful is the reversal. The vendor didn't need to prove himself with words. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't boast. He let his hands speak. His quiet precision, his fluency with each tiny component of that watch, his understanding of time itself. All of it was communicated through his work. While others watched, maybe snickering at first, they began to realize they were witnessing something rare, real expertise. The kind that isn't taught in classrooms. The kind that comes from years of unseen labor. The kind that comes from having to be 10 times better just to be noticed once. In that brief exchange, the hierarchy of assumed value collapsed. The man who believed himself to be powerful was forced to watch someone he deemed insignificant demonstrate an ability he didn't possess. The vendor wasn't just skilled, he was exceptional. His gift had been there all along, just unnoticed. And not because it wasn't worth noticing, but because no one ever looked past the surface. This reflects a broader truth about our society. So many people work in the shadows, mastering crafts we all depend on. Mechanics, cooks, janitors, tailors, street artists, technicians, caretakers. And yet, their contributions are rarely celebrated. Their names don't make headlines. Their hands fix what we break. Their intuition often outperforms expensive algorithms. And still, they go unrecognized, not because their skill lacks merit, but because the world often fails to slow down and truly see them. There's a kind of quiet nobility in being this kind of person. The vendor wasn't out there seeking a spotlight. He wasn't hoping to impress a CEO. He was simply doing what he does every day, applying his knowledge, respecting his craft, showing up prepared. And yet, when his moment came, he rose without hesitation. He didn't flinch, because for him, this wasn't luck, it was lived experience. He had done this before, hundreds of times perhaps, just without anyone important paying attention. That Rolex wasn't the first challenge he had ever faced. It was just the first time someone powerful had taken note. And that is the tragedy and the beauty of his story. It took an accident, a moment of arrogance, for the world around him to realize that greatness was always there. Not created in that moment, but finally acknowledged. When we define value only through wealth or fame, we miss the richness of human ability that exists all around us. The vendor's talent didn't appear suddenly. It had been shaped quietly, in the background of a society too distracted to care. He had likely fixed watches for years, maybe even more complex ones, each time pouring the same care and precision into his work. But without a title, without prestige, that work went unnoticed. Until that moment. Until someone finally paid attention, not to his appearance, but to his results. ChatGPT said, "Power doesn't always come from position, it comes from purpose." That's the kind of truth people don't learn in boardrooms or read in leadership books. It's something revealed in moments when confidence, skill, and clarity emerge from the most unexpected places. In the story of the Blackstreet vendor and the wealthy CEO, this truth stood front and center. One man had all the traditional markers of power, a luxury suit, a Rolex, a title that carried weight in high places. The other had no nameplate, no assistants, no financial portfolio to brag about. But when the test came, it was the one with purpose, not position, who controlled the moment. It's easy to assume that power belongs to those who sit at the top of a company or have the loudest voice in the room. The ones with corner offices, company cars, private jets, and exclusive memberships are often seen as untouchable, as if the positions they hold are a reflection of some superior ability or intellect. But positions can be given. They can be inherited, bought, or gained through connections and timing. Purpose, on the other hand, is earned through self-awareness, persistence, and the refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. The vendor didn't wear a badge of importance, but he knew who he was and what he was capable of. His purpose wasn't to impress, but to do good work, the kind of work that speaks for itself. Every movement he made with that watch was intentional. He didn't rush. He didn't second-guess. He approached the challenge not like someone trying to prove himself, but like someone who already knew his value. That mindset is where real power begins. It's internal, it's rooted, and when it shows up, it changes the atmosphere. The CEO, despite his external authority, lost control the moment he underestimated the other man. He thought he was making a joke, placing a bet he couldn't lose. His power was supposed to protect him from being humbled. But what he didn't realize was that arrogance can't stand for long in front of purpose. The vendor didn't take the bait emotionally. He didn't get flustered or feel insulted. He simply stepped into the opportunity, calm and collected, driven not by the chance to win a Rolex, but by the commitment to his craft. That is the distinction between positional power and purposeful power. One is loud, dependent on recognition and reinforcement. The other is quiet but unshakable. Purpose isn't threatened by disrespect because it doesn't seek validation from those who don't understand it. And when that kind of strength is revealed, it forces even the most arrogant observers to pay attention. The vendor didn't try to act powerful, he simply was. His confidence came from knowing he had something to offer, something of value, regardless of how others viewed him. His purpose gave him presence. It gave him command over the moment. It allowed him to shift the dynamic without saying much at all. The watch may have been expensive, but what he brought to the table was priceless. Mastery, focus, and humility wrapped in quiet strength. People often chase status thinking it will give them authority, but real authority doesn't come from titles. It comes from the energy you bring into a room, from the way you carry your history, from the truth you walk in daily. The vendor had likely been overlooked, disrespected, and underestimated many times before, yet he still chose to show up with integrity. That decision, to be consistent, to do excellent work no matter who's watching, is what builds the kind of inner power that can't be shaken by status. The CEO, on the other hand, revealed the fragility of position-based power. It collapsed when it was challenged by someone who had nothing to lose and everything to give. His influence meant little in that moment, because what he valued, wealth and image, couldn't match the deeper strength of a man working with purpose. No speech, no business card, no executive title could protect him from the realization that the real authority in that moment did not belong to him. This story becomes more than a tale of reversal. It becomes a reminder. A reminder that in a world obsessed with climbing ladders, the strongest foundation is often found in those who never sought a pedestal. The vendor didn't have to raise his voice, flash credentials, or demand respect. He let his purpose do the work. And that purpose, rooted in skill and dignity, turned him from invisible to undeniable in the eyes of everyone watching. Respect must be earned, not demanded. This principle is often spoken but rarely lived out by those in positions of power. Too many believe that titles, wealth, or seniority automatically entitle them to deference and admiration. They expect people to respect them not because of how they treat others or the values they uphold, but simply because of who they are or what they've achieved. But real respect doesn't operate that way. It cannot be bought, forced, or faked. It's built through action, character, and consistency. The CEO in the story walked in with the assumption that his presence alone commanded respect. He wore his success like a crown and assumed the street vendor would recognize it, acknowledge it, and bow to it in some way. But what he didn't realize was that real respect flows not upward toward power, but outward toward integrity. When the CEO tossed his broken Rolex toward the vendor, it was not an offer of trust. It was a performance of superiority. There was no sincerity in his challenge. He didn't hand the watch over with hope or belief. He did it with mockery, expecting to humiliate the man by setting him up to fail. It was a test disguised as a joke, and the CEO assumed that failure would reinforce the hierarchy he believed in. But something remarkable happened. The vendor didn't react emotionally. He didn't protest, didn't hesitate, didn't shrink. He simply accepted the moment with calm focus and proceeded to do what he had done many times before: apply his skill with precision and patience. The contrast between their actions was stark. One man sought attention and dominance through dismissal. The other responded with composure and quiet excellence. In that exchange, the meaning of respect began to shift. The crowd that may have initially laughed with the CEO started to pay closer attention. Their amusement faded as the vendor's hands worked with confident grace. In real time, people witnessed the collapse of ego and the rise of authenticity. It wasn't just a watch being fixed, it was a narrative being rewritten. True respect is not a performance. It is a response to witnessing someone stand in their truth. The vendor didn't try to earn respect by playing up to the CEO or attempting to impress anyone. He simply did what he knew, and did it well. That alone was powerful. There's something deeply moving about watching someone operate in their zone of mastery, especially when they have nothing to prove. In that moment, the vendor showed that respect isn't granted to the loudest or the wealthiest. It's naturally given to those who carry themselves with quiet confidence and unwavering purpose. The CEO, on the other hand, learned the hard way that demanding respect without giving it first is a losing game. His laughter and arrogance didn't elevate him. They exposed his insecurity. By offering the watch as a joke, he revealed his belief that the vendor was beneath him, unworthy of serious engagement. But the vendor's excellence disrupted that belief, exposing the weakness behind the CEO's bravado. The power dynamic shifted, and it became clear that the man who deserved respect wasn't the one with the Rolex. It was the one who knew how to fix it. This moment holds a deeper lesson for society at large. We're often taught to look up to those with influence and status, assuming they must have earned their place and therefore deserve automatic reverence. But real leadership isn't about commanding respect, it's about inspiring it. And that happens only when people lead with humility, empathy, and consistent action. The vendor never asked for respect, yet he received it, because what he displayed couldn't be ignored: skill, dignity, and self-assurance. The story also challenges the idea that respect is hierarchical. The vendor didn't treat the CEO with disdain, even though he had every reason to feel insulted. He met the moment with professionalism and self-control. That in itself was a powerful act. He didn't stoop to retaliation. He let his work do the talking. And in doing so, he elevated himself in the eyes of everyone present. Respect earned that way is lasting. It doesn't fade when the spotlight moves on, because it's rooted in truth. What unfolded on that street corner wasn't just about a broken watch. It was about broken assumptions. The CEO assumed his status made him worthy of respect. But in trying to test the vendor, he exposed a deeper truth. Respect follows those who deserve it, not those who expect it. And the crowd that gathered around saw that unfold clearly, not because of words, but because of how each man chose to act. Humility rises when arrogance is disarmed. In a world that often rewards ego and confidence that borders on entitlement, humility can seem rare, almost outdated. But every now and then, a moment occurs that flips the script, where the proud are silenced not by force, but by truth. In the story of the CEO and the Black Street vendor, such a moment unfolds in front of an unsuspecting crowd. What began as a display of superiority turned into a lesson in humility, not because someone demanded it, but because the quiet brilliance of another made it impossible to ignore. Arrogance walked into the scene with laughter and assumptions. Humility walked out, born from the sting of being proven wrong in the most unexpected way. The CEO's arrogance wasn't subtle. It was loud, public, and rooted in a belief that his wealth and power made him untouchable. He didn't offer the vendor his Rolex as a challenge with respect. He offered it as a joke, a performance meant to entertain himself and others at the expense of someone he deemed beneath him. He expected failure, and in expecting it, revealed his inability to see beyond his own status. His arrogance wasn't just personal, it was cultural, learned through years of moving through the world with people constantly reinforcing his superiority. He had been taught that people like the vendor exist to serve, to fade into the background, not to shine. That belief had gone unchallenged for so long, it became second nature. But arrogance always rests on unstable ground. It needs applause, validation, and control to survive. The moment any of those begin to shift, it begins to crumble. That's exactly what happened when the vendor took the Rolex without a word, without fanfare, and began to work. The silence was striking. There was no flurry, no signs of confusion or panic. Just focus. The street vendor, with years of unseen practice, had no need to prove anything. He simply showed up, and that alone began to unravel the CEO's performance. As the watch slowly came back to life under the vendor's hands, the atmosphere changed. The crowd that might have chuckled at first became still, drawn into the unfolding drama. They weren't just watching someone fix a watch, they were witnessing a reversal. The CEO's laughter died down. His smirk faded. The certainty in his eyes turned into disbelief, and then into discomfort. This was unfamiliar territory. He had never imagined a man with calloused hands, standing on a city sidewalk, could possess such skill, such poise, such control. His arrogance hadn't prepared him for this. What disarmed him wasn't confrontation, it was undeniable truth. He couldn't argue with the results. The vendor didn't need to say a word. His competence dismantled every false belief the CEO had carried into that encounter. There is something deeply powerful about being proven wrong in public, not through aggression but through quiet excellence. That's where real humility begins. Not when someone is humiliated, but when they're forced to see the gap between who they thought they were and what reality reveals. In that moment, the CEO was no longer the center of power. He became a student, a witness, someone suddenly aware of how little he knew about the world beyond his bubble. His watch may have represented success, but it was now being held by someone who, without money or title, had just become the most respected person on the sidewalk. The humility that rose within the CEO wasn't planned. It was pulled from him by the undeniable presence of a man whose skill and grace spoke louder than any title ever could. Humility born this way tends to last. It leaves a mark. It reshapes how people see others, and often how they see themselves. The CEO didn't just see the vendor differently. He saw his own arrogance for what it truly was, a fragile armor built on untested assumptions. He had thought power meant being above others. But now he stood, silent, in front of someone who reminded him that power rooted in ego is weak, while power rooted in truth and purpose is unshakable. For those watching, the lesson was unforgettable. They saw how quickly the high can be brought low, not by force, but by integrity. The vendor never tried to humiliate the CEO. He simply allowed his work to speak. And in doing so, he exposed how shallow arrogance can be when placed next to real depth. That contrast was the turning point. The moment humility had no choice but to rise from the ashes of pride. Greatness can come from the most overlooked places. In a world obsessed with spotlight and recognition, we've come to believe that greatness wears a certain face, speaks a certain way, and comes wrapped in prestige. It's packaged in awards, headlines, titles, and applause. But the truth is far more expansive. Greatness doesn't need a stage to exist. It doesn't require a resume stacked with credentials or a crowd chanting someone's name. More often than not, it's hidden in plain sight, in the unnoticed, the underestimated, the everyday people who carry extraordinary potential inside ordinary appearances. The street vendor in this story is one of those people. To the average passerby, he was just another man on the sidewalk, working quietly, blending into the background of a busy city. No nameplate, no assistant, no polished image designed for admiration. He was the kind of person others walk past without a second thought, not because he lacked value, but because the world isn't trained to look for greatness in such places. And yet, when the moment called for it, he didn't rise up from nowhere. He simply revealed what had been there all along. The Rolex incident didn't make him great. It exposed the greatness already within him. The precision with which he handled the watch, the calm confidence he displayed, the silence with which he operated, it all reflected a level of mastery not found in textbooks or conference halls. His excellence wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. But when the spotlight fell on him, even unintentionally, it illuminated someone whose skill and poise could rival any executive or specialist in the luxury world. This moment forces us to question the lenses through which we define success and talent. Why do we assume greatness must be visible to be real? Why do we dismiss people who don't look the part, or speak with polish, or carry influence? The vendor had likely been dismissed by countless others before that day. He had probably been ignored, talked down to, maybe even ridiculed. None of that erased what he had cultivated within himself. Years of learning, of failing, of improving, of perfecting his craft until it became second nature. The greatness that emerged in front of that CEO didn't arrive in that moment. It had been waiting, quietly, beneath the surface. And that's what makes stories like this so powerful. They remind us that society's view is often too narrow to catch the full scope of human potential. It focuses on noise, not depth. It celebrates visibility over authenticity. But true greatness doesn't care for decoration. It speaks through results, through how a person handles pressure, how they respond to condescension, how they carry themselves when no one is watching. The vendor had nothing to prove and everything to offer. And once he was given, even unintentionally, the chance to show it, he did so with the kind of grace that changes perspectives. The CEO, on the other hand, came from a world where greatness is assumed based on wealth and hierarchy. He had been praised, followed, and flattered so often that he forgot there were people beyond his circle who might possess knowledge and expertise he didn't. It took that single encounter to remind him, and everyone around, that you can't measure value by net worth or fashion sense. The vendor's greatness didn't need affirmation from the CEO. It had been built slowly, patiently, outside the view of corporate boardrooms or elite gatherings. In watching the vendor fix that Rolex, the people around weren't just witnessing a repair, they were witnessing a revelation. The man they had overlooked revealed something essential about the human experience, that talent, worth, and brilliance often reside in those society trains us not to see. And once that kind of greatness is revealed, it can't be unseen. It challenges our assumptions, forces us to pay closer attention, and leaves us wondering how many other lives we've walked past without realizing their depth. What also makes the vendor's greatness so profound is that it was rooted in service, not ego. He didn't gloat. He didn't demand validation. He simply did what he does best, and in doing so, he not only silenced arrogance, but elevated the entire moment. His work became his voice, and through it, he spoke volumes about resilience, excellence, and identity. In that one interaction, he redefined what greatness can look like. Not grand, not loud, not dressed up, but steady, skilled, and unapologetically human.